Hello everyone and welcome back to Dirty 20s D&D. This video is going to be a little bit different than normal in the fact that it's a compilation of the first 10 episodes of How to Homebrew. We thought that bringing these episodes together, cutting out the intros and outros, could perhaps create a new perspective on the evolution that our channel has undergone. We really hope you guys enjoy it. This series has been a long time coming and we want to thank you for supporting us with it. So without further ado, let's get the show on the road. First, a tip that I will be repeating in every single one of these episodes, where it's relevant, of course. Ignore balance when you're starting to work on something homebrewed. The hardest thing you will encounter is trying to ensure something is balanced while you don't even know what you're doing yet. You will be fighting yourself the whole time, and you'll burn out before you even finish. To help display what I mean, as I'm going through this process, we're gonna make a couple of spells today. One that deals damage, and another that is more focused on utility. So, when starting with spells, you have to consider what you want it to do. Your greatest desires for this ability. For me, I want a spell that sends a wave of fire around me, let's say. I don't know. And it lights the ground on fire as well, burning enemies' feet. And another spell that I want is one that lets me see the past in a location that I'm in. Say a bomb went off and I walk up to the area and create an illusion that shows me what happened there. So now that we know what our spells want to do, we have to compare them to other spells. For our first one, our incendiary wave, we should look at large area spells and also at spells that leave areas of effect on the ground. So, fireball, cone of cold, good examples for that first one, and spike growth is a great one for the second one. The level of these, cone of cold being 5 and spike growth being 2, so if I don't want my new spell to be 7 or 8, I should mellow the 2 out when I'm combining them. But balance is for later. Right now, we're just gonna push it all together and see what happens. Second, for our temporal hindsight spell, we are going to want to look at big illusory spells and at identifying spells so you can create the image and identify what needs to go into the image. So I looked at third level major image and first level identify. We don't want our thing to be crazy high level because after a certain point the spell loses utility. It's a mystery solving spell. So I chose those two so that I could create large area of sights and sounds and identify magical traces and marks left around. Fourth level is probably a good target to hit. Taking anything away might remove the spell's utility. Next thing to consider is when your spell should be accessed. If you want your spell to be big, it's going to be higher level, which means a lot of characters might never get it. So take into consideration if a spell is better in the early or later game and start to tune it to that. I want Incendiary Wave to be big, but not too big. So I'm going to aim for 5th-ish level with that one. And like I said before, 4th seems pretty good for Temporal Hindsight. So now that we know our levels, we can look at the spell damage table and speculate 8d6 for our wave spell's initial damage and keep that 2d4 for the lingering damage from spike growth as the inspiration, and temporal hindsight doesn't need damage tuning, so that is just whatever for now. Next, the bolded guys need satisfying. That is your casting time, range, components, duration, and class is available. By now you should probably be able to fit a few of those. For classes, I'm going to give Incendiary Wave to Sorcerers, Wizards, and Warlocks, and Temporal Hindsight is just going to Wizards. It's Chronergy, and that makes sense to me. Next is casting time. Casting time for the wave should be an action. It's being used in combat. Hindsight, on the other hand, should take longer. It's a big deal. It reveals a lot of information. It should also last longer than an instant. So I'm going to give it a casting time of a minute. We don't want either of these to be ritual because you don't make damage spells like that ritual, and Hindsight, being ritual, means that it could be used an unlimited number of times, which could ruin all mysteries. It has to be a serious consideration to use it. That's why it's 4th level. It's slightly higher than the lower level ones, but not too high that it's useless by the time you get it. After that, we need to look at range. Range for the wave should be 60-ish feet, just a big old ring of fire around you. Maybe 60 feet sounds pretty okay for a 5th level spell that deals 8d6 damage, especially because it could also hit your allies, so you're really going to have to take into consideration, unless you're an evocation wizard, or a sorcerer with this meta magic. I don't know which one it is. Odaluk's, as an example for this damage, deals 10d6 or something like that with the same radius, and it's 6th level, so it's fine. And the range for the Hindsight should also be about 60 feet. That's half the range of Major Image. You don't really need to be far away from this, but it's good to sort of give yourself a little bit of space. For the components, a combat spell like Incendiary Wave really shouldn't require anything to be consumed. It might need a valued component, but for now we're just going to compare it with like Fireball. So we give it verbal, somatic, and a non-consumed material, like a piece of charcoal. Why not? And then for our Hindsight guy, VSM as well, and while this more logically could require a consumed or a valued component, we're going to set it up with a simple small hourglass for now, and maybe come back to it later. It's important that material components hold some connection to the spell. When you're making a spell, it wouldn't make sense for any of these components to not be related. Like if we flipped these two around, it wouldn't make any sense at all. So having them make sense where they are is good. It means that they're unique to those spells. Lastly, for the bolded guys, duration. We're going to set Incendiary Wave to instantaneous. We might change that for the lasting effect. We'll see. Like I said, lay everything out now, balance it later. And then for the Hindsight, we're going to set it to concentration, obviously, because the spell lasts a while. It's not really a combat spell, and you should be able to drop it whenever you want to. Maybe an hour sounds okay for now. And like I said, all of this can change later. So now for the last part of planning a spell out, writing the spell. For Incendiary Wave, we have outlined that in a 60-foot radius, a blast of fire bursts out from you instantaneously, igniting the ground. It initially deals 8d6 fire damage, and then every 5 feet a creature other than you moves along the scorched ground. They take another 2d4 fire damage. Good for now. And for the other one, we said it's based on Major Image, so we should look at that spell. It affects a 20-foot cube, so let's use that. A 20-foot cube has illusory images appear in it from the last 10 minutes, and obviously you can hold concentration for an hour to fast forward, rewind, play, pause, everything in the area until you lose concentration or the spell ends. Now for balancing them, the very important part. If anything seemed off before, we're going to fix it now. If I had said 12d6 for the damage of the wave, I would either have to raise the level or lower the damage. But I think I'm going to instead change the duration. I am going to make a concentration up to a minute, and that is tied to the burning ground. Once you stop focusing, it stops burning. If I had Temporal Hindsight be a 60-foot cube with a 360-foot range, or looking back over the last 10 years, we'd need to rein that in a bit, or make it like 9th level, because that's crazy. So, if you're making this spell for your character, consider what you would say if a player of yours came to you, their DM, and asked you to use the spell. Would you say yes? Last but not least, casting at higher levels. Not every spell needs an at higher levels condition. A lot of them don't have them. For both of these, I'm going to give examples because I set them up that way. For damage dealing spells, it's a very easy process. Usually you're just going to add more dice. For this one, 1d6 more initial fire damage per level cast higher. And for Temporal Hindsight, we can get a little creative. We're going to increase the amount of time you can peer back in the area. we're going to leave the concentration at an hour, but now if you cast it at level 6, you can look back an hour instead of 10 minutes. If you cast it at level 8, you can look back over the last 24 hours in that area. And if you cast it at level 9, you can look back over the last week. Higher level castings allow you to peer back through more time, which means you can be later to an event. So you're investigating a murder that happened 3 days ago, but you're like the guy for investigating murders. You just drop this 9th level spell and bam, you know exactly who did it. So now, if you follow this guide, hopefully you've emerged at the other side with a balanced, fun, innovative spell to either show your players or use alongside your allies in your game. Today, we're going to be talking about feats. Feats are optional bonuses that players can choose instead of taking an ability score improvement. And while there are quite a few of them, players can only get 8 at max if they screw with the system and power game to the max. So, variety is key. No 2 players should have the same feat breakdown. And with there only being like 30 of them, and a lot of them being no-brainers to take, and others being borderline useless, more choice is never a bad thing. The first thing to consider, like all homebrew, is what you want the feat to do. Like the other episodes in this series, I'm going to make one alongside you, so that you can get an example of the process. And for my example, we're going to go with a feat to match a few others. There's a medium armor master and a heavy armor master. Why isn't there a light armor master? So that's what we're going to do. First, like before, we ignore balancing right off the bat. We're just going to jump straight into what we want the feat to do. We look to the others, and we just start writing. The other 2 require proficiency in medium and heavy armor, because obviously for you to be a master, you have to be able to use it. So, you need light armor proficiency to take this feat. Great. Next, we again look to the others. They get an ability score improvement, so this one will too. You gain a dex bonus. Simple as that. Just following the formula. Then we need to think of what looks like 2 abilities. So we think of what a light armor wearer would want. Why would they take this feat? So we think of rogues. We think of agile fighters and bards. They're quick, they're smart, they're up close and personal with the enemy, they use light armor. So first, they should gain the ability to more easily break out of grapples. It's very likely that these people will have good acrobatics or great acrobatics and terrible athletics. So they should have some easy way to escape grapples. And then also maybe because, they need to be quick, they need to be agile, they're masters in this light armor, they should gain a bonus to their dex saves, equal to their proficiency bonus, because D&D likes to do that now. And then we sit back and consider the balance. So these 3 things, that's fine. That's fine. The dex save bonus means that if you already have proficiency and a high level rogue, then you could theoretically have a plus 17 bonus to your dex saves. Which isn't broken, but it is concerning. I think I'm going to leave it for now, but a more stringent DM might have an issue with that. The most important thing is that once you're done balancing, you just need to ask the question, is it still useful? This is the same with spells, this is the same with feats, this is the same with anything we're going to talk about. If your answer is yes, it's still useful and you think it's balanced, then you're good. If all of a sudden you're saying no, then you probably took away why you even wanted to make it in the first place and might want to power it back up. Just talk with your DM. I'm sure that they'll help you. And then we just polish it up, clean up our writing, and send it. And there is our light armor master feat. Done and dusted. Now, we're not going to finish the episode here. I'd like to do something a little bit different. I'd like to spotlight another creator, one you're all very familiar with. Matt Mercer. 5 years ago, when he created the original Tal'Dorei campaign guide, he released a feat with it that I consider amazing and surprisingly balanced. Spell Driver is a feat that you can only take when your character is above 8th level, and it gives you more freedom in your spellcasting. You can cast 2 leveled spells in a turn, supposing only one of them is 3rd level or higher. That's it. It's a single ability that you can take when you hit a marker and where it makes sense. It falls in line with the actor feat? Nah, I'm just joking. It falls in line with most of the feats. It's actually pretty useful. You can be stronger, but you also go through your slots faster. It's pretty balanced. This homebrew feat does everything I outlined above. It was a guiding light into my dive into homebrewing content for D&D. It takes a frustration some players have, not being able to cast a bunch of spells all in the same turn, and it gives them a choice to alleviate that frustration for a cost. It's not overpowered, it's not useless, it's balanced, and it's that easy to place into your game. Just a scrap of paper with some words, and it's real. An idea and passion. So first, as always, the golden rule is to try not to balance as you go. Just do it at the end, once all your ideas are down on paper and you've started to get an idea for some numbers that you like, just see if they make sense. But for now, we just need to start. We need to pick a class we want to make a subclass for. There are a lot of great options for classes that need new variety put in them, but I'm going to go with Sorcerer, because I have a really cool idea to make a sorcerer that's specifically designed for combat. Their whole thing is using meta magic to hit fast and hard. I've been thinking about this for a while now. There's not really one that strays away from the idea of elemental lineages or divine gifts. I would like a sorcerer that's focused more purely on pure weave energy flowing through them. Something that they have to spend years learning how to focus and direct for themselves. So, spell sniper sorcerers, as I've deigned them, are going to be a combat-focused nuker. Based on that, we have to consider what we're going to be giving them, and based on what makes sorcerers unique already. When making a subclass, it's important to enhance the characters who take it in accordance with what the class already offers. No one wants a rogue subclass for heavy weapons because none of their abilities work with them. And the other important thing is to not make a worse version of another class. I'm looking at you, Scout Rogue, you Ranger wannabe. Man, I got a thing for rogues. So, sorcerers don't get any armor or weapon proficiencies. Let's change that slightly. We don't want to make them too strong, give them, crazy stuff. We're going to give them light armor and simple weapons, just sort of pad out what they can already do. This way that they can get a little bit more down and dirty with the rest of them. And then for enhancing their spellcasting at level 1, let's give them an ability that lets them have a very slight chance to hit enemies around corners, and an extra cantrip to go along with it, much like the actual spell sniper feat. This subclass is named the same as that feat, but what's important is that you don't double up on abilities. A character should be able to choose to not take something just as much as they should be able to choose to take it. So, if someone really doesn't want or see the need for that feat, why would you give it to them? Give them something that works with it, but does not supersede the need for it. So instead of giving them the same ignoring 1/2 and 3/4 cover and the double range and all that stuff, let's just focus on enhancing the other aspects of a sniper. The damage of single shots and the creativity one should have being a master of the weave. So what this class may lack in unique ideas, it makes up for in the same way that Battlemaster Fighter makes up for being placed in a sort of samey class. It gives you more options. I want this class to get more metamagic choices, not just in the fact that I want them to be able to take more metamagics in general, but also I want to make some new metamagics to go with the subclass. Not specifically for it, but to be used for all sorcerers and introduced with this one. But also, the subclass can take more of them because there needs to be some variety, some unique reason to take this. Sorcerers normally only get, 4, and I want perhaps at the end for this subclass to get like maybe 8. Yeah, you're only getting 20 sorcerer points to use them with, but think of the amount of variety that you could have, whereas normally you would only be able to do certain things. Now you can do more. And now as we get to the point in the script I wrote, just improv and edit later, lol. Great. So next we should look sort of at other sorcerer subclasses for perhaps where we want to go. Sorcerers get abilities at 1st, 6th, 14th, and 18th levels, but also I want this subclass to get more meta magic options, which means that we need to sort of tone down all of our other things. We'll figure out exactly where we're putting those extra meta magic features later, but let's look at building out perhaps some other ideas. So we want a combat-focused sorcerer. So perhaps at 6th level we could look at giving them maybe, because they still have only a d6 hit dice and their armor class is limited by the fact that they can only use light armor, we should give them something actually good inspired from rogues. I don't hate rogues. I've played many rogues. I don't know why I keep saying I hate rogues. Perhaps after they, so that it's limited a little, after they cast a spell of 1st level or higher, they can dash, disengage, or hide as a bonus action. That way they don't always have to be quickening spells to do that, and that they can become hidden easier. And now this might be too much, also inspired from rogues at this ability. If you're hidden from a creature when you cast a spell on it, the creature has disadvantage on the saving throw. I really like that ability and I wish it was used more. I wish it was perhaps in a feat or something. And from last episode, maybe you could come up with a feat for that. But I'm going to put it tentatively in the 6th level slot here, and we'll see where that goes for later. So, yeah. Next at 14th level, it is a humongous jump. It should be, you have to go hard into Sorcerer to get the next 2 abilities, and as such, they should be pretty good, because Sorcerer tends to level off after a certain point. Similar classes at this level are getting the ability to hurl creatures through hell, or, I don't know, attack 3 times in a turn. That's pretty close to around, that's what, 11th level? I don't know. So let's say that you can pick a spell that you know, or maybe you'll get 1 extra spell known just specifically for this ability that you can switch out. And supposing it requires an attack roll to hit, you can increase the range of that 1 specific spell to like as far as you can see. And that if, you fire it, any creature making a check to determine where it was fired from would be made at disadvantage. That way you can actually snipe from a long distance and people have no idea where you're coming from. And maybe there's something else we can do with this as well. Maybe you can also choose a line spell. And going back to those additional meta magic options we had earlier, maybe there's a meta magic option to turn a line spell into an attack roll spell. And that's something that we should look at. Right here we're going to put a little pin and we're going to say a meta magic to condense a spell from a line to a single target. And then maybe another one to go from a line to a big area, like a lightning bolt into a fireball. These are interesting ideas. Maybe we should even have a third one to go from fireball to a line, from a line to a single target, and then back up and back down. And so that way, any spell can become any other kind of spell. That would drastically increase the variety that this class could use well. Obviously, these would all cost sorcery points, and those would go fast for this class. And as such, the Meta Magic Adapt feat, on top of the Spell Sniper feat, would be invaluable to this subclass. Now, taking that pin out and going back, we still have an 18th level ability to determine. So, abilities at 18th level can get kind of insane. Druids, they can automatically speak with all animals. They can basically stop aging. I know that at this point, clerics are almost to the point where they can just talk to their god and ask for favors nearly at will. Bards know a dozen extra spells from other classes. Shit gets insane. So here we need to drop our sorcerer nuke, which is what we said we were going to do at the start of this. So at 18th level, maybe when you have advantage on an attack roll for a sorcerer spell or cantrip, and that would also imply for your long-range attack that we outlined at 14th level. So if a creature is not aware of you, you have advantage to hit on a spell, which means that if you're 3 miles away from a tower and you're shooting someone on the ground at the edge of a city, you'll have advantage. If you hit on that attack, you can spend some sorcery points to deal an insane amount of extra damage, and in a flurry of deadly accuracy, annihilate a target in one shot. And obviously, this is not going to be entirely restricted to that, and as such could be used in combat. So we don't want to go too hard, because if you play with the optional flanking rule to give advantage, then things could get insane. If you just flank a target, shoot them, and you can just blow their head up, that would be too much. So maybe it's either going to be a single number or a variable number. You can deal an extra amount of damage, and that's something that we'll come back to when we get to the balancing section. But for now, we've outlined our abilities. Proficiency, curving shots, extra meta magic, rogue stuff to get away from combat and have disadvantage on saving throws, our long range attack, and then our deadly accuracy, on top of our 3 additional meta magic options. Now comes the balancing and the formatting. So, spell snipers. Your innate magic comes from a focused inner power source. After years of keeping it bottled up, it finally explodes out of you in the form of channeled magic. You gain access to more specialized meta magic and superior ways of channeling your power to harm your enemies or save your allies. You are a combat specialist. At first level, you gain proficiency in light, armor, and all simple weapons as well. You also learn an additional cantrip from any class of spellist that requires an attack roll to hit, counts as a sorcerer cantrip for you, but does not account against your number of known cantrips. You can cast it without using verbal or material components if it has them, meaning that all you have to do is hold up your hand, and it's yours. Then, the last thing you get at first level is curved shots. When you cast a cantrip or spell that requires an attack roll to hit, you can curve your magic around corners and barriers. You can make attack rolls against creatures behind total cover if you're aware of them, although the attack rolls are made at disadvantage. So now, why I've made these decisions. The light armor and simple weapons will not break your game. They will just give your sorcerers more choices and raise their AC by less than mage armor would. So, give some, you take some. Just means they don't have to take mage armor if they want a little bit of a bump. For the second ability, I've called Innate Force. Just gives them an extra cantrip. It's useful. It lets them get to Eldritch Blast or any other homebrew attack roll thing that they would want, but they should just take Eldritch Blast, Firebolt, or Ray of Frost. And then lastly, curved shots. Normally, 3/4 cover is a +5 to AC and Dex saves, so making attack rolls at disadvantage against creatures behind total cover is probably balanced. I would obviously allow this, I've written it, but speak to their DM about that. Perhaps they're a little bit iffy, but seeing as how you have to be aware of a creature, they have to be behind cover, but you have to be aware of where they are, and they still have to be within range, which means that your shot, if it would normally track 60 feet, it has to be able to reach with that curve 60 feet. I think these first level abilities are just fine. Now, at third level, I have I've done exactly what I said. I've changed the normal 4 meta magic choices up to 8. So at third level, when you gain your first 2, you actually get 3. And then you get additional choices at 6th, 14th, and 20th. And this is not made clear in the books, but I have made it a special note here. Whenever you gain a level in any class, you can switch out one of your meta magic options for another. Which means if you find that you are no longer using, say, Empowered spell, you don't need it anymore. You can drop it and pick up Twinned, which is way better. Now, at 6th level, Hit and Run. Starting at 6th level, on your turn, after you cast a sorcerer spell of 1st level or higher, that limits you to only being able to use ones from this class and therefore subclass. You can dash, disengage, or hide as a bonus action. Taken from rogues, but more limited because you're a sorcerer, not a rogue. It also means that you don't need to take 2 levels in rogue if this is an ability that you were looking for. A secondary ability at this level is if you are hidden from a creature and cast a spell on it, the creature has disadvantage on the saving throw it makes against the spell this turn. Again, stolen from rogue, arcane trickster, it's incredibly useful, and in a class that's focused mostly on attack rolls, this ability will let you not feel useless when it comes to taking spells that are saving throws, if you don't want to take the additional meta magic options for whatever reason. Then, at 14th level, Long Range Attacker. You can learn an additional spell, a 5th level or lower from the Sorcerer spell list, supposing that it requires an attack roll to hit a creature, or is an area of effect that is a line that deals damage. So, your Chromatic Orbs, your Chaos Bolt, it's a good one, your Lightning Bolts, all of these, good options. The spell does not count against your list of Sorcerer spells known. You can then choose one of your known spells that meets the same requirements to become your signature spell. Now, this essentially means that you get one more spell known, but you don't even have to choose that immediately for your ability here. That signature spell now has a range of 3 miles, also known as the Horizon, and checks made to discern where your spell was fired from are made at disadvantage. And remember, if your target can't see you and you're within range, you have advantage on the attack roll, or they have disadvantage on the saving throw, which means if you're using the line spell, you can now fire a 3-mile long lightning bolt, which is insane, and also a problem if your DM uses the bouncing mechanic. You can change the chosen spell for this ability from your list of known spells after every long rest, supposing that it's 5th level or below and meets all the other requirements. By the way, none of this limits the fact that you can upcast a spell. You can cast a lightning bolt at 9th level because it's a 3rd level spell that you know. That is a worthwhile point to note. Additionally, if you possess the focused spell metamagic, which is going to be outlined at the end, you can choose a spell that has an area of effect that is a cone, cube, cylinder, or sphere as your chosen spell for this ability, so long as you use that metamagic to turn it into a line, or further use targeted spell, turn it into an attack roll. And that allows you to choose even like Fireball, so long as you condense it down or turn it into a single attack spell, you can have that be your signature spell. And then lastly, at 18th level, Deadly Accuracy. Once per turn, when you have advantage on an attack roll for a sorcerer spell or cantrip, if you hit the attack, you can choose to spend 5 sorcery points and deal an additional 5d10 of the spell's damage type to the target. This number was kind of figured out by saying flanking, advantage could be a problem if you're like, you could spend any number of sorcery points between 1 and, you know, your level, which is all of them, 18 or whatever, to deal that many d10s of damage. So you just nuke the bad guy in one turn and be done. But now, if it's only 5d10, it could still be really good, but you'll have to wait and see. And then we reach the end with our additional meta magic options. I have written up 4 for use with the subclass to match the 4 extra meta magic options that you can choose. So all of these options can be used if you've already used other meta magics on your spell. First, we have Altered Spell. When you cast a spell that forces other creatures to make a saving throw, you can spend 2 sorcery points to change the saving throw type to any other. So you can make Fireball an intelligence save. And all of this was inspired by a single erroneous line from something that I saw long ago, and I can't quite remember where it was, but I wrote this because why can't sorcerers just do this already? They can change the damage type, why can't they change the saving throw type? I just think it's cool. Next is Explosive Spell. When you cast a spell that has an area of effect that is a line, you can spend 2 sorcery points to expand it into a 150-foot range, 20-foot radius sphere that hits all creatures within it, still making saves like normal. So, turn your lightning bolt into a fireball, made of lightning. Focused Spell, the one that was alluded to a lot earlier. When you cast a spell that has an area of effect that is a cone, cube, cylinder, or sphere, you can send 2 sorcery points and choose to focus it into a 100-foot long by 5-foot wide line that extends from you and hits all creatures within it. They must still make saves as normal. Turn your fireball into a lightning bolt, made of fire, because why not? And then lastly, Targeted Spell. When you cast a spell that has an area of effect that is a line, you can spend 2 sorcery points to change that spell to an attack roll against a single target with a range of 120 feet. If the spell had an effect that would allow a creature to save for half damage, but you miss with the spell, that target still takes half damage. So, Fireball, you focus spell it into a line, Targeted Spell it into a single attack. So that's 4 sorcery points. You then throw it. They might still take half damage or might still take full damage, but you can hit a single creature now. And you can use it with your long range attacker ability for an attack roll, which means you get advantage, which means that if through deadly accuracy you can spend an extra 5 sorcery points to deal an extra 5d10 damage. That's a very costly turn. It's 9 sorcery points. But at that point you're 18th level, so why not? And that is how I homebrewed a subclass for Sorcerer, and have sort of been throwing in sporadic ideas for other classes throughout. A good point of note is to look to the other classes, see what numbers they see what abilities they give, and then sort of try to focus that in around yours. Look at the levels, look at the criteria, look at what makes that class unique, and try to figure out what niche you can carve within it. There are great ideas still coming out nowadays from Wizards. In Tasha's, there was the Aberrant Mind Sorcerer and Clockwork Sorcerer, but actually for other classes you have, like Order and Peace Domain Clerics, which are completely new domains. There is the Chronergy Wizards in Wildmount and Graviturgy. There's really freaking weird patrons coming out for Warlocks like Genies. All of these stem into new ideas. You could make subclasses based on your favorite video games, based on your favorite shows or movies. And hopefully by following sort of this rough guide of, just sort of throwing what you want on paper, writing it all out, and then figuring out what numbers make sense, what abilities make sense for what levels, following along with, okay, it needs to be really restrained when you first start, and then you can start opening up, and by the time you reach 18th level, 20th level, it doesn't matter. Barbarians are getting +4s to 2 scores. Gods are being called down. Paladins are becoming divine avatars. You can do whatever you want. So, go wild. Make a subclass that makes your druid half animal forever. Why not? It's just how to homebrew subclasses. All magic items have a classification and a rarity. The common classifications are weapon type, potion, and wondrous item, where others exist, and you can, of course, make your own. But wondrous item tends to be just the grab bag of, if it's not a weapon and it's not a potion, it's a wondrous item. And for rarities, they go common, uncommon, rare, very rare, legendary, and artifact. As items get rarer, they become more and more sparse in the world, and artifacts are extra special, and that there's only one of them in each multiverse. Some items also require attunement, in that they may require a character to dedicate one of 3 slots to use them. Some attunement items are even more specific, requiring characters to be of certain alignments or hold levels in certain classes. And now, with the definitions and explainers out of the way, let's get on with making our own items, beginning with common. Common items should be everywhere. They are your healing potions, your prank items, your helmets that make your eyes glow. Common items rarely require attunement, and most of them require creativity or else they're useless. Our item should be something that only a specific set of people want, but those people will keep for the entire campaign and have as an accessory piece. And I think I know exactly what I want to make. But for general purpose, think of something that won't affect combat too much and will just be a fun accent piece. That's all the common items are. So, for our item, I'm going to design a hair tie that can magically style the hair of the person wearing it, even if the hair isn't part of the style or in their hair at all. So, our hair tie of instant styling, because that's already a good enough name, is a common, non-attunement wondrous item that when you're touching it, you can use an action to immediately restyle all of the hair in your head, beard hair included. The hair immediately falls out of style and reverts if you ever cease contact with the item. And that's it. A common item. We're going to clean up the writing a bit more to be more akin with the rest of the D&D stuff, but that's it. Other examples of common items at this level are unbreakable arrows, spellbooks that can't be burnt or damaged by water, or wands that force people to smile. It's really just a grab bag section of items that's mostly about having fun. Next, our uncommon item. For our uncommon item, we can get a little more creative. Wizards have kindly blurred the power line between rare and uncommon, making things a little bit difficult, so I'm going to set a little bit more of a boundary here for the purposes of this video. But uncommon items can get a bit crazy, like wing boots, circlets of blasting, and bags of holding. But for the purposes of this video, like I said, they're going to be a little more conservative. For our uncommon item, I'm going to make something that requires attunement, and so it's got to be good, but not too good. It's still just uncommon. I'm thinking of an armband, one that acts as a small wormhole. You activate it, and then you can move your arm up to the band, through a solid surface to interact with objects on the other side. So you can reach through a door and unlock it from the inside, or through the wall of a safe and grab something out. This item, the Band of Phasing, is an uncommon wondrous item, requiring attunement. This item is a golden metallic band that resizes itself to fit on the arm of whatever creature is wearing it. As a bonus action, you can cause the band to activate and make your arm up to the band intangible to objects. You can pass your arm through solid walls and barriers and interact with items on the other side. This effect lasts for 1 minute, and if the effect ends while your arm is inside of an object, you take a d6 of force damage and your arm is shunted from within. You cannot phase through creatures with this item. And a last note, since this item is uncommon, once you use this ability, you cannot do so again until the next dawn. So, reasons behind making this item. We designed something slightly stronger than common, but weaker than some of the other uncommons. It, for the most part, falls in line with the definition of an uncommon magic item. It gives you a new creative ability. You can only use it once per day. It can't really affect combat too much, but it will be massively helpful. It is a combination of sort of a portable hole or a bag of holding mixed with the chiming thing that auto unlocks things. I don't remember what it's called. It's here now. So When making magic items, it's very easy to just compare them to others of the same rarity categories. There are so many to compare to, you'll always have something to bounce off of. I use those, but obviously whenever you're making your item, if you want it to be for combat, you can compare to other uncommon combat items. I believe +1 weapons are uncommon, stuff like that. So, you know, depending on where you want your power level to be, just look at the other items and they'll help you figure it out. Next, for our rare item, let's add yet another step of complexity. Let's work with charges. Charges are a very common use of magic items within 5e. They're a way of managing how many times you can use an item, or various features of an item. For ours, we are going to make a magic staff, and it's going to be attunement, and it's going to use charges to manage its various abilities. So let's go off of that. Our Staff of the Stormcaller, yeah. It's going to be a rare staff that requires attunement by a druid, sorcerer, warlock, or wizard, which, side note, is a thing you can do. You can limit the use of items to specific classes, and that's how it's done. I chose those classes because those are the ones who use staffs, and those are the ones who use lightning magic. So, moving on, this staff has 10 charges, and it regains 1d6 plus 4 charges daily at dawn, and if the last charge is expended, you must roll a d20. On a 1, the staff disintegrates into ash and is destroyed. The last property is a function of a lot of staffs within the game, and as such I just thought to put it in here. And the charges regained should always equal the maximum number of charges. So if the staff had 12, you could do a d8 plus 4, or a d10 plus 2, or even 2d6. Continuing, the wielder of the staff should gain resistance to lightning damage, and they can cast the following spells for their associated charges. For 0, you can do Lightning Lure and Shocking Grasp, maybe. And for 1, Thunderwave and Witch Bolt. And for 3, Call Lightning and Lightning Bolt. And for 6, you can cast Chain Lightning. These spells were chosen because they deal lightning damage, or Thunderwave's case, are just associated with lightning. And the charge counts were determined by the levels of the various spells. So, you know, Witch Bolt and Thunderwave are 1, and Call Lightning and Lightning Bolt are 3, and such and blah blah blah. I wouldn't want to give any higher than a 6th level spell to a rare item, and I wouldn't want to give it to them more than once per day. So it costs 6 out of 10 charges, and we're set. And that is our rare item. Now on to very rare, where things can get properly interesting. For this classification, these items are just slightly below legendary, and as such, this is where items go that are worthy of epic level characters. So our item is going to be, we haven't done anything for melee characters yet, and let's go with something combat focused. With that in mind, what do melee characters need in combat? More movement, more opportunities to do things like variety. Our item is going to be something with that. We're going to make a sword, a +2 magical sword, that changes the flow of time to allow our wielder to have more chances to do stuff, and it's going to require attunement as well. As part of the attack action, the wielder of Time's Thin Edge can make an extra attack. They can do that 3 times per day, but only once per turn, regaining all uses again at the next dawn. Also, when they strike a creature with an attack using the blade, they can force that creature to succeed on a charisma save or lose their reaction. And they can do that as many times as they hit. And lastly, the wielder of the blade can use a bonus action to dash. Also an unlimited number of times. So, as a very rare item, it deals more damage, has several useful abilities, and is just slightly less than legendary, with being +2, limited uses, no crazy unlimited number of uses of spells, but still good nonetheless. Now, for our penultimate item, the second to last, the legendary rarity, the strongest item that most players will ever see. We need this item to be special, something to keep forever. This is the level of wishes and ultimate crab power armor. Let's make a set of armor. +3, of course, it's legendary. And this armor is going to be the armor of the cosmos. which is a legendary set of plate armor, let's say. Let's lock this one down. This armor looks like a glowing golden set of metallic plate, where the reflections don't seem to mirror their surroundings, but instead depict a starscape. The wielder of this armor gains a 10-foot bonus to their walking speed, and a flying speed equal to their walking speed. Their unarmed strikes deal 1d8 radiant damage, plus their strength modifier still, and the wearer of this armor can also cast Prismatic Spray once per day, with a save DC of 19. And lastly, they can cast Misty Step and Dimension Door at will. And that is a legendary item. It is ridiculously powerful and useful, and something that once a player gets it, they will never let it go. Your AC is 21 just standing still, and you can teleport all over the place, and cast a really strong spell once per day. This is something that you give to a player beyond level 15. This is legendary. Lastly, artifacts. These items are different. Not only are there only one of them in each multiverse, but there are also some extra aspects to them, unique to artifacts. These major and minor beneficial and detrimental properties are found within the Dungeon Master's Guide, but you can, of course, make your own. This item just has to call for some, but I'll also make a second copy with some example ones inserted into it as well. So, our artifact, the most special, powerful, and picky item that we can make, is going to be the Staff of the Star Mother. This is a +3 quarterstaff that deals an additional 2 damage dice worth of force damage on every hit. That is 2d6 or 2d8 extra, depending on which combination of hands you're using. Beyond that, this item will set your charisma score to 24, as well as allowing you to cast a variety of powerful spells, probably things like Teleport, Crown of Stars, Disintegrate. Beyond that, you also gain True Sight out to a range of 120 feet, let's say. And then, we leave the rest up to our 2 major beneficial properties, 1 minor, a major detrimental property, and 1 minor of those as well. Our sample item could have the minor detriment that you always glow in a 10-foot radius with dim light, so that you would be spotted more easily in stealth. The major could be that your alignment shifts 1 ticker towards lawful good. Not quite on the level of the Sword of Zariel, just like, yeah, you're kind of like a true neutral character. Well, now you're neutral good, or you're lawful neutral. Just one little tick over, just to really cement your place as having to choose this item. The minor benefit could be that the wielder gains a +1 bonus to their AC. And the 2 major ones could be you gain a flying speed of 60 feet, and the other one could be you can't be paralyzed, petrified, or restrained. And with some cleaning up, some choices of spells, and some locking in of properties, that will be our artifact. Now that we're done, let's look back over our items. Our common item was the hair tie of instant styling. Our uncommon item was the band of phasing. Our rare item was the Staff of the Stormcaller. The very rare was Time's Thin Edge. The legendary was the Armor of the Cosmos. And our artifact was the Staff of the Star Mother. All of these items show a progression of power and cost. Together, they demonstrate the various requirements and options that items can give your players, and they are how I see balancing and creating magic items for my games. We're going to be talking about homebrewing entire classes for D&D 5e, something that I've been accustomed to doing during my time tinkering with the game, and something that has been displayed properly on our weekly streamed games of Icarius the Black Between the Stars. I developed a Spectrum Knight class, a riff on the Green Lantern Corps from DC Comics, well, all of the Lantern Corps, if you didn't catch that. Something that should have probably been evident the moment that the bird summoned a shotgun from thin air, but whatever. And today, we're going to be making another new class, and I'll be walking you through it, pointing out the various ways that I look for ideas, and balance myself against other established points in the game. So sit back and sit up, your posture's terrible, as we jump into today's episode of How to Homebrew Classes So first, we think of what we want our class to be focused around. It's got to be something unique and something that could not possibly be a subclass for anything else that already exists. I could walk you through how I made Spectrum Knights, but I think I want to do something slightly less complicated and maybe save that for a future video. So today, we're going to make a class centered around body alteration, whatever that be, genetics or cybernetics or arcane. I want a way to change your being to gain abilities and advantages that others will never see. So, the first things that all classes need to consider are, first, their utility. What kind of class are they going to be? And that will guide your decisions of hit dice and proficiencies. But really, we're just going to focus on those numbers now, and we're going to think our utility is sort of like a general, and we'll find our flow as we go. So I think I want this class to be focused primarily on the self, with very maybe little uses for weapons and armor, but I want this class to be unique, to stand out, and to not need to rely on a lot of things that other classes do. So we should go with a decent hit dice, but also we're thinking about making a magic subclass for this, and so we can't go too hard or too strong into one direction or the other. Spellcasters for 5th edition do not get good hit dice because a wizard with good hit points would be overpowered. So we need to consider our scope. Are we going to go for stronger hitters, glass cannons, or are we going to neutral it out and maybe give them a little bit more hit points? Or maybe we could boost the hit points of a subclass or two with abilities that help them out, and not give those ones to the arcane one. Sorcerer somewhat does this in the fact that the draconic sorcerer gets some extra hit points, and we could look to that and perhaps go harder into that, make some melee subclasses and an arcane one. So let's do that. We're going to give this still unnamed class a D8 for its hit die, and after that, we're going to move on to the proficiencies. I want this class to be intelligence-based. We need more of those in the game. So that means that when determining our saving throw and skill proficiencies to get the class, we should look at the intelligence-based ones first. Let's give them intelligence and charisma saving throws, because not only are they smart, they know who they are. Their senses of identity and self are secured within their alterations. They make themselves who they want to be, regardless of what is considered normal. So for skills, with Tasha's out, we don't need to consider this too much, as it says that any skill proficiency can be exchanged for any other at character creation, or at least that's how I rule it. So we're going to give our class 3 choices from the following list, but really it's any 3. So Arcana, Deception, History, Investigation, Perception, Persuasion, and Survival are what I'm going to set, but when you make your class, you can choose just any random assortment of skills and set a number, usually 2 or 3, and allow your players to choose what they want from that list, or from all of them. And after all of that, I think I've finally come up with a name for this class. The Deviant. And a rough description, as framing them out will give me a lot of good ideas, and I think sort of once you figure out the ground level for what kind of class you want to make, you can start thinking of the flavor, and once you think of the flavor, you can start thinking of ideas for abilities and imagining stronger and stronger characters and what they're able to do. So let's begin by framing our Deviant. You've always felt different, like you were in a body that wasn't your own. And so, in defiance of the normal rules of society, you have sought to better yourself through abnormal means, and in one way or another, you have transmuted your body to be different, better, superior to your peers, and in accordance with how you always knew you were meant to be. As a deviant, you choose one of the divergent paths and enhance your body to superhuman levels. You can gain strength, speed, reflexes, all unknown by others of your race, as well as those, the ire of those who despise the abnormal. Now back to proficiencies. We have to determine our armor, weapon, and tool proficiencies as well. So, like the hit points thing, I think I'm going to give this base class a light armor and simple weapon proficiency set. And for tools, let's go with Alchemist's Supplies and Tinker's Tools, as you are known to be a working mind. And then we can leave it at that. Subclasses could get more, and we're just sort of setting the ground floor for what everyone gets. And that's where we're going to leave it. Starting equipment. The last thing to do before properly starting on the level 1 abilities for the class is the last thing we have. Let's give our deviants a set of leather armor, either 2 simple weapons or a martial weapon, and then either a shield or a martial weapon. This could be changed later, but just sort of a random, you can pick this or you can pick that, and that's sort of how D&D does their stuff. And then lastly, for equipment packs, either explorers or scholars maybe, because they're learned folk. All of that just tends to make sense for the kind of class we're making, and you know, a lightly armored modifier would kind of have that stuff. They have utility, so they don't need to be loaded, but they're also strong and they can use weapons, so let's let them have them. And that's it. We're probably going to come back and polish this up later, but for now, that's it. Next, let's tentatively place our ability score improvements. The ASIs at their usual places are 4, 8, 12, 16, and 19. And that's probably going to stick too, but things may change later. I've been known to give out more of these than normal, and that's just because I like players to get to play their unique characters. And instead of using this to gain bonuses, I usually encourage them, instead of taking an ability score improvement, to take a feat, because you can be so much more creative with them. Now, for our level 1 abilities, you've got to pick your path. It's very important that I see for this class to pick their subclass at level 1. However, when homebrewing your class, anywhere between levels 1 and 3 are when subclasses should be chosen, and that really depends on where the divergence lies. Other level 1 choices are clerics, warlocks, and sorcerers, and that makes sense for all of them. They begin to get their abilities based on their unique way of getting them. Clerics find a god, a domain, and they worship under that. Sorcerers are born with them, so of course it's at level 1. And warlocks don't get any magic until they make their pact. So level 1 makes sense. For here, you're not different. You're not a deviant until you make the first cut. So you pick your path at level 1. And this will determine everything else. We can come up with our ideas for them later, but we should name them and decide what bounds we want to set on them so that they don't overlap. These are not power bounds. We're not balancing. Just like every other How to Homebrew episode, we're going to save that for the end. But rather, these are scope bounds. We don't want bleed over between the subclasses, because that would destroy the point of having them in the first place. So, names. The divergent path of the spell scribe for our magic one, and then the divergent path of the splicer for our gene editor one. And lastly, for our cybernetics one, the divergent path of the mechanized. We really could have waited to come up with these. Names are a low priority, but I like choosing these first because it gets even more ideas flowing. Names and words get them moving in your head, and it really helps to branch out your ideas. Now, we're not going to fill these paths out yet. We're first going to make the base class, and then worry about the subclasses later. The way we know what everyone will have at the levels we choose later will all be determined by the base class, and that will determine how our subclasses can branch out and be unique. So at level 1, you choose your subclass, and you get 1 or 2 things from that. I don't know what they are yet, but there should be a generic ability, a tiny one, that holds them together. And how do I know that? Because I just looked at the other classes. Clerics, sorcerers, and warlocks all get abilities from their level 1 subclasses, but they also get their spellcasting. It's the one thing that holds them together. Now, obviously, this is not a wholly spellcasting class, but we can still give them something to bind them under one roof. Level 1 abilities have to be defining. They are what makes a class worth picking. I can't tell you how many level 1 dips into classes I have seen or done myself. Everyone's taken a level in Rogue just for sneak attack or expertise, or a level in Bard for inspiration. It's just a thing that happens. So, deviants are outcasts. They are scrappers, and most importantly, they are making peace between their minds and their bodies. So at level 1, all deviants should be able to overcome adversity through either sheer force of will or something else. I think, and this is an idea that hasn't really been used much, They should be able to burn hit dice to do something. I don't know, but I like the idea of spending those to do something other than healing, because I honestly don't find that I spend them very much. So, maybe since this is all one giant allegory for coming out, they should be able to burn hit dice to be able to reroll saving throws against charm and fear effects. And why that specifically? Because they are able to push back against the hate they may receive for simply being themselves, to have a leg up when others try to make them not who they are, to change their minds, to make them afraid of the changes that they want. Since this is a level 1 ability, we need to limit the crap out of this, and we do that by making a tie to the hit dice, and by saying that they must use the second roll. And they have to determine if they're re-rolling before the outcome is initially determined. After that, let's brainstorm some ideas and throw them into level slots, and make them balanced later. Deviants should be able to have an edge when it comes to understanding foreign objects or ideas, because they're able to empathize with disenfranchised or forgotten peoples, and they should be able to take what's around them and make sense of it better than most. So from that, let's jot down an idea to have somewhere early on the ability to have some sort of advantage in comprehending their surroundings. Maybe better insight or arcana or history or investigation related to understanding people or places. Beyond that, combat-wise, most of their abilities are going to come from their subclasses, but something all deviants should get is a fighting style, and maybe another little ability that gives them an edge and applies to all subclasses. For choosing which fighting styles a class should be able to get access to, you just have to consider what would make sense. I usually just give classes the whole lot to pick from, but for these guys, we're going to pick a set few. Let's go with 2-weapon fighting, great weapon fighting, defense, blind fighting, dueling, superior technique, and unarmed fighting. Sounds like a good bunch. I just picked those because they sort of all fit in the same melee area. Other ideas we can have could be maybe having advantage on certain charisma checks, or getting proficiency in wisdom saving throws. I'm sure that when you make your class, you're going to know the general scheme that you want for your ideas and abilities, and if you're not sure, just look at what's already out there. Say rogues get cunning action at 2nd level, and you're making a sneaky class that's still good at combat. Maybe give them the ability at 3rd level, or even 5th. Extra attack should be given around level 5, but some subclasses get it at 6. We'll get back to that later. And if you have any cool ideas that aren't from other classes, just try to find where they fit. Compare those to spells, to monster abilities, whatever you can find, and just figure out your numbers. Speaking of spells, spellcasting, or half-casting, or even 1/3 casting, should be given where necessary, and based on other factors. If you want to make a full caster, they should not be good at weapon combat unless damage is not the focus of their spellcasting, like Bard, Cleric, or Druid. And if you want to make a half-caster, look to Ranger and Paladin. Both make up for their limited magic with great even weapon abilities. Full casters should never have higher than a D8 hit die, and no class should be a D12, because that's Barbarian's thing. Once you have your group of ability ideas, place them where you want your characters to get them, with the more fundamental abilities given at earlier levels, and more serious and strong ones given later. I think that this is going to be a good breakdown for our class today, but you will of course have your own. You can see that I changed my mind on the ASIs, giving them one more at level 10, as I am prone to doing. After you make and pick your abilities, it comes time to define and balance them. Again, we just look through the others. Anything with dice should match the other classes. Anything with abilities should track with them too. Abilities should only be used a certain number of times per day, unless they're too weak or social focus to matter, or they're given at really high level. Once your main class is done, it comes time to make your subclasses. For these, I'm not going to go into much details. We already have gone over them, how to homebrew them, but our ideas of technology, genetics, and magic will be fleshed out like these. Each will have their own sub-choices, like the Totem Warrior Barbarian. In case you can't tell, I really like customization. And then at the end, because I gave my level 20 ability, a capstone ability, to my subclasses, they're all sort of in the same line, but they get their own little thing at the end. You can see they're all very similar. But I like that there's just those little tweaks, and they all get better. They all get massively improved at level 20, and that is what matters. Level 20 capstone abilities should be worth taking. You don't want to... You look to Druid and Barbarian. Don't look at Bard or Sorcerer. Look at really what people like to take 20 levels in and focus it around that. And then we need to do our sanity checks. Does the class have its own identity separate from the others? Do the abilities make sense for the levels you gave them? And do they make sense for the story that you're trying to tell with this class? Do the subclasses carve their own niches? And do they make sense? If all of your answers are yes, then you've homebrewed a class. Final notes, deciding multi-class requirements and benefits. For this one, we're basing it on intelligence, so intelligence of 13, because 13 is just the number. And then let's go with armor and weapon proficiencies. Let's just match them, as well as the tool ones. No extra skills, some classes do that, not this one, they get enough. And now, we're done. So join me as I go through and create a new race with you today and show you all my process of homebrewing races for this game. Spoiler alert, this one is going to be pretty simple and short. Firstly, what kind of race do you want to make? Because honestly, Wizards have made nearly as many as I can think of and updated all the other ones. I'm still going to try, but I don't know. You need to get your idea together first. I'm going to go with a race focused on gem-based beings. They're going to be inspired from the Shard Mind from older editions of the game, but mostly made from scratch for 5e and with, my own little subtext for it. Then we have to begin. We have various criteria that all races hold. They have size, speed, languages, age, ability score improvements, potentially dark vision, and then one or two more unique abilities. That is what all races will hold. So for our updated Shard Mind, only vaguely looking to the past, since this is in essence a tutorial, we can note and copy a few things, but let's try to keep within the bounds of 5e. First, their size. In 5e, player characters can only be one of two sizes. This is because making them any larger than those two would drastically increase the power in combat by virtue of the number of spaces within their reach. And there's only one size smaller, and being tiny might present an issue in terms of power and stealth and avoiding traps. So PCs are either small or medium. And our Shardmind race is going to be medium, with a height range of just over 5 feet to just over 6 feet. It's pretty arbitrary. Once you pick a small or medium, you can give a race small and medium to choose from. Really doesn't matter. For their speed, we're just going to go with the standard 30 feet. It's a safe bet, and it's what 90% of races in the game use. If you go with a small race, 25 feet might make more sense. If you go with a race that's supposed to be faster, like, Wood Elves and Tabaxi and a couple other races have 35-foot movement speeds, I believe, and that is just to, denote the fact that those races are quicker. For their age, we can go with living up until maybe 500 years-ish, probably. That's probably fine. And while there are a great many options for your age ranges, they're crystals. They don't really age. Yours could, humans live to 100 in D&D, half-orcs live to 80, and tieflings and ASMR live to 120. It's just whatever. Elves are fucking immortal. So we can say that for this race, why they die is maybe because one day the magic in them goes out, and they harden into actual gemstones, and that's how they die. For languages, Common is a must. All races must know Common. And then we can pick one more. You could pick 2 or 3 more, but then you might have to limit other things, because the more the languages you know, the easier it is for that race to be useful. I don't know, probably not the right word, but that's what it is. And so, while there's a great many options for a second language, I want to go with deep speech, because as these alien kind of creatures, that one sounds best for me. Also, they knew it before. So, for ability score improvements, these are more like suggestions. As with Tasha's, you could ignore these and place them wherever. Let's give our race a +2 to charisma and then a +1 to either wisdom or intelligence. Player's choice. In general, all races get a +2 and a +1. Sometimes there's choice, and sometimes there's mountain dwarves. But +2, +1 is what you should be looking for. After all of that, we get on to racial abilities. We're going to give Shard Minds Dark Vision of 60 feet. 90% of races get this, so why not? And then after that, we can choose to either give them 1 or 2 special abilities, the thing that actually separates this race from the others. This is also where you would break your race into sub-races. You would delineate abilities to different lineages of Shard Mind or of whatever race you're making. I'm now going to give a couple of examples, but when we design Shard Mind, I'm only going to pick a few of these. When you design your race, look to the others and think of unique abilities. Do you want some races to have a climbing speed, advantage on stealth due to natural camouflage, spellcasting, natural weapons? Like I said, Wizards has made like 50 or 60 races. You have so many choices to look through. So the first ability that we're going to go with is similar to Warforged. As a living crystal, you don't need to eat, drink, breathe, or sleep, and magic can't put you to sleep. You still need to perform at most light activities for 8 hours to gain the benefits of a long rest, but you do not need to become inert. You can choose to spend the hours in an inactive, motionless state where you are still conscious, but only look like you're sleeping, look like you're a rock. And the second ability that I'm going to go with from now should be Telepathy, within a range of 30 feet. And this effect can be used through walls so long as you are familiar with the creature you're speaking with. This effect's range can increase to 60 feet at 5th level. That ability I gave them because they are the Shard Mind, are they not? They are a hive mind on their home world, let's say, and they should be able to communicate without speaking. Alternatively, as an example, I could have given them spellcasting. Cantrip at 1st level, a 1st level spell either cast at that level or at 2nd level given at 3rd level. Confusing when I say it that way, I know, but the visuals make it easier, I hope. And then a 2nd level spell given at 5th level. The leveled spells should only be cast once per day, and with the uses recovered again after a long rest. You could also denote that if they have any spell slots, they can cast these spells using those as well. For an example set, Mind Sliver can be our cantrip, Mind Spike will be our 1st level spell cast at 2nd level, and then Tasha's Mind Whip will be our 2nd level spell given at 5th. Psychic damage dealing spells for Psychic, Rock, Gemstone race. And then with some polishing, our race is done. And hopefully yours is too. And that's how to homebrew races. So today, not only am I going to give you as much advice as I can about making monster stat blocks for this game, I'm also going to try and show you how I make combat encounters balanced and tailored for my players and make them feel like, regardless of the enemy, everyone has their place in this game. So first, we're going to talk about making monsters. When you start, you have a lot of boxes to fill out. Name, size, creature type, subtype, alignment, armor class, hit points and dice, speed, ability scores, saving throws, skill proficiencies, damage, resistances, immunities, and vulnerabilities. Condition immunities, senses, languages, challenge rating, and then finally all of their unique abilities. Not to mention legendary resistances, actions, mythic abilities, lair actions, or environmental or regional features. Just, all of that. The name is what most people come up with first. Like, for instance, you need to make a magical alien displacer beast that's been infected with a mind flayer tadpole and can just blast psychic waves out from its head, as well as teleport. So obviously, this thing is called the Intellect Predator. And it's going to be pretty strong, and this is the monster we're going to make today. This thing is going to be the end boss of some forgotten cult's dungeon, and it's going to be guarding some really weird loot. Or, alien style, it's going to show itself while your party is in deep space, and begin to pick them off one by one. But we're not designing a dungeon today. That's for a future video that's already in production. So back to our Intellect Predator and its size. In 5e, there are 6 size options. In ascending order, they are tiny, small, medium, large, huge, and gargantuan. Finding those more, tiny is anything smaller than 2 feet tall-ish, and they occupy a 5-foot space on the combat board. Small is anything between 2 and 4-ish feet tall, and they also occupy a 5-foot square in combat. Medium is anything between 4.5 feet tall to just over 8 feet tall, and they are the last of the 5-foot space sizes. Large is anything between 9 and 15 feet tall, and they occupy a 10-foot square in combat. Huge is anything between 16 and 30 feet tall, and they occupy a 15-foot square on the battlefield. And Gargantuan is anything over 30 feet tall, and they occupy at least a 20-foot square on the battlefield. But that's just the minimum. And they can be as large as the DM or you feels like. I've made 40-foot Krakens and Dragons, 60-foot behemoths that just take up the entire battlefield. It makes them feel more epic if the monster takes up half the table and they manage to take it down with their little 5-foot guys. So, we're going to make our guy large, and we're going to do that for a couple of reasons. One is to accurately impose the kind of board status that I want them to have. Large creatures fit within a 10-foot cube and are, obviously larger than players. They're threatening, they stand over them without being too massive. They're still agile and fluid without being bulky titans. They can hit 12 squares within 5 feet versus 8, as opposed to if they were medium or small. And reason 2 is because I'm basing their physicality on displacer beasts and that kind of panther aesthetic. And those kinds of creatures are large-sized, so a combination of looks, feels, and reference. After their size, let's do their creature type. In D&D 5e, there are 14 creature types. They are aberrations, beasts, celestials, constructs, dragons, elementals, fae, fiends, giants, humanoid monstrosities, oozes, plants, and undead. I'm gonna go with aberration, because that's the alien mind flayer one, and that's all the reasoning you really need. Beasts are regular animals, celestials are angelic beings, constructs are synthetics, dragons are self-explanatory, elementals are beings created by elemental magic like fire mephits or water weirds, fae are tricksy spirit kind of creatures, fiends are devils, demons, and everything in between, giants are just big dudes, humanoids are regular dudes, oozes are self-explanatory, so are plants, and so are undead, and monstrosities are just whatever else, literally whatever else. For the subtype, we are not going to fill that out for this guy, but common ones are demon and devil for fiend, or a race for humanoid like elf or dwarf, but for aberrations, specifically this guy, it doesn't really make sense to have a subtype. You don't really need to worry about it. Types are categorized because different spells affect different things, but subtypes never really matter. It's just like a fill-in-the-blank kind of thing. After that, we're going to do alignment. This is the same as on a character sheet, the 9-space grid that goes from lawful good to chaotic evil. And for this guy, we're going to go with lawful evil. And I say that because he's willfully committing acts of violence and such. He is an intelligent creature. It chooses violence. After that comes armor class, AC, the number they need to roll to hit it. For some creatures, this is an arbitrary number, just high or low. A swarm would just, little guys at low level, I just set it to 10 and everything but nat 1 hits. For bigger threats, this should usually be around the same as your strongest spellcaster's DC or your highest, fighter's AC. So at low levels, around 13 to 16. At the end of the game, maybe as high as 20 to 23. If your enemy wears armor, just give them AC for that armor, but with monsters like these, you can set it with the natural armor feature. It equals 10 plus dex plus whatever number you want. I'm setting this guy's AC at 16, because while this guy is strong, he's only like level 5 strong, not level 15. Next, for hit points. I usually see this as a function. The average damage players do at this level times that number of players times the number of turn you want that combat to last. This function will be shifted towards the longer end if they miss a lot, or towards the shorter end if they do lots of damage that you weren't expecting. For this guy, I'm going to shoot for 4 level 5 players who deal an average of 15 damage per turn with 4-round combat. So that's 4 times 15 times 4 for a total of 240 hit points. If you feel like that's too high, cut it back. This is not a hard and fast rule, it's just sort of the ballpark that I use for how I plan combats, and how I came out with the 1000 hit point feature for the final boss in my previous campaign. When I previously designed the Intellect Predator, though, for use in Icarius, the Black Between the Stars, streamed Sundays weekly on our Twitch channel, Dirty 20s D&D, 2 to 6 p.m. It was done for level 3 characters, so it had only like 140 hit points, and the 5 of them finished it off in, 5 or so turns. It was an interesting split encounter over a course of the session that was just kind of this whole thing. For multi-monster combat, divide the pool of hit points amongst however many creatures you've got planned, and then consider that damage versus their hit points versus how many turns you want the combat to last, and how many targets that they can hit in one turn. For low damage dealing guys, boost their HP a little, and maybe considering their ACs reduced a bit to make them easier to hit, but harder to kill. For hit dice, these depend on the creature's size. D4 for tiny, up to a D20 for gargantuan. It's like they plan the 6 sizes to correspond with the 6 dice. Nice like that. So at large, these are going to be D10s. And that's all the guy's going to have. After that comes movement speeds, and we're going to be pretty boring here because it gets another avenue of moving that's not talked about in this section. But here you can denote a monster's walking, climbing, burrowing, swimming, flying speeds. Yeah, that's all of them. You can also highlight whether or not this creature can hover, which means if they're paralyzed, they don't fall out of the sky if they're flying. If a monster does not have a climbing or swimming speed, it is half of their walking speed. And for our guy, we're going to go with a 40-foot walking speed, and that's it. It means he's quick, but not crazy fast. He can move, but he also has another avenue of moving that I said we'll talk about later. After that comes ability scores. For low-level threats, don't go crazy. Scores should be capped at roughly 18-ish. So ours is going to get an 18 strength, a 15 dex, 14 con, a 16 intelligence, a 14 wisdom, and a 10 charisma. So good, boss-worthy, but not world-ending. It's very important that you control yourself. It's very easy to be like, I can set whatever numbers I want. 30. Don't do that. After that comes saving throws. You usually choose between 1 and 3 unless they're an endgame boss. Ours is going to have intelligence and wisdom, and that's it. For skill proficiencies, choose between 2 and 7-ish at the high end. Ours is only going to have investigation, perception, and survival, because it's a predator, it's a hunter, and a tracker. It doesn't need persuasion or arcana, and usually a monster does not really need to worry about the intelligence, wisdom, or charisma skills, but sometimes a deception or insight check may come up on their end, so consider just throwing those on if you think they might need it. After those comes the damage stuffs, resistances, immunities, and vulnerabilities. Creatures who are resistant to a damage type take half as much damage, those who are immune take none, and those who are vulnerable take twice as much. For immunities, I'm going to put psychic. For resistances, let's go with non-magical weapons, that is all physical damage. For vulnerabilities, let's go with necrotic, because this is a life-sucking creature, so having the life sucked out of it is a bad thing. And then I'm going to make a plea to you all. Not every monster after level 5 needs to be immune to poison, and please make monsters with vulnerabilities. It's always fun for players to discover them and begin to reshape the battle around them. It's a unique brain challenge to work for them for, in a potentially not very entertaining situation. Some players don't like combat, but they really feel like they can make a difference if all of a sudden they figure out they have the tool to stop the threat quicker. And plea over. Let's move on to condition immunities. For these, there's a long list. Every condition in the game you can make your monster immune to, from blinded to stunned. I usually just pick a few that make sense and are relevant. For instance, if you have no monks, don't worry about stunned. So for this guy, we're going to go with blinded, charmed, and frightened. I chose blinded because I like to imagine this guy as having like an intellect devour, like brain on his face, kind of, sort of. So obviously his eyes are covered and he just sort of feels with telepathy and telekinesis and he sort of knows what's around him. And I chose charmed and frightened because those suck and they end combats instantly. I like players using their words to convince or frighten enemies and not spells or abilities. So I still let people frighten the monsters, but I don't let them frighten them with spells because that's kind of boring. So we can move on to senses. Dark vision, blind sight, tremor sense, and true sight. Dark vision is the ability to perceive in darkness as if it were dim light, and dim light as if it were bright light. Usually when in darkness, creatures can only see shades of gray. We're going to give our guy 120 feet of dark vision, and then blind sight after that is the range you can see without using your eyes, and we're also going to give him 120 feet. I just toss them both in there, so I'm just not confused. So he can see someone if they're still invisible with blind sight. He can see in darkness because he doesn't really see. Tremor sense is the ability to reliably locate creatures through the vibrations in the ground alone. And true sight is the ability to see through illusions, invisibilities, and sometimes even into the ethereal plane. We're not going to give our guy either of those, but those are really useful if you have monsters that should be able to see in those ways. This is also the section where passive perception goes. It should automatically be filled out, but if it's not, it's calculated just like on a player's sheet, 10 plus their perception bonus. After senses comes languages. You can either make them speak them or just understand them. I'm going to have a guy know common and deep speech, but not be able to speak them. And then also in this section, give him 120 feet of telepathy so he can communicate with those languages, but not speak them aloud. Lastly comes challenge rating. This means nothing. It's basically useless aside from determining a monster's proficiency bonus. It's whatever. We're just going to set ours at 5 because that's the level we want to fight, and leave it there. Literally doesn't matter. And now we're done, but we're also not. We want a monster that can do stuff, and right now we have one that does nothing. So we've got to give it abilities and attacks now. Basics first. We're just going to drop multi-attack into its actions. It can make 2 of them, one with its bite and one with its claw. And then we're going to write those attacks. Attack bonus based on strength, 5 feet reach, damages a smaller die or 2, d6 or d8, and then a unique thing. Grapple for the bite and the possibility to be knocked prone if it hits someone with a claw. After those, we're going to give it a spellcasting feature, and an 8 one, so that they can use some spells at will, some once a day, some 3 times. And now is where we go back to that movement thing from earlier. I'm going to give the Intellect Predator Misty Step at will and Dimension Door 3 times per day. And also, it's teleporting, Vortex Warp 3 times a day, because why not? And then for a once a day, really big damage dealing spell, Mind Spike. And then, another feature, Ambusher. It's one that when you surprise a creature, you have advantage on attacks against them. So the Intellect Predator can vanish from a room, appear in another, and in a flash and flurry be attacking someone with advantage on their whole turn. It makes them an incredibly deadly threat, especially at this low of a level. After this, legendary resistances, the ability to automatically succeed on a saving throw. You can set these at any number per day. We're going to set ours at just 1, just so that way you can show them it's a serious threat, but not ignore everything they do. It's like, hold person, no, I'm just going to run away. And then they can't do that again, so you get 1. Legendary actions. We're also going to give this guy 1 per round, but usually you give them 3. Tiamat has 5 of both of these. It's whatever. This, as a legendary action, could be an attack, casting Misty Step. There can be anything. Large combat encounters with single monster threats should always have legendary actions, so that way that they can take more turns and have better action economy. You know, you give them a lot of legendary actions, so that way, you know, they're not just swarmed and destroyed in a single turn because you're using flanking, which is not a problem. Consider using just a +2. It'll make your life easier. Mythic actions are the most video game boss type thing in D&D. When you reduce the monster to 0 hit points, they revive back up to a mostly full HP bar, and they gain new abilities, sometimes a new appearance, and it's that metal slug. You think you took him down, but no, he's back up and he looks different. Lair actions happen at initiative count 20, losing ties, and they're things that the monster can do to change their environment and situation so that they can do stuff on the fly. They can cause crevices to open, gas to flood into the room, or acid to bubble and pop out. Our monster is not going to have any of these. Regional effects we won't also worry about, but for your sake, they are out of combat things. You know, a smelly ground, a black sky, dead trees. It's things to set the ground level for what a monster should do to its environment. A dragon's horde should be constantly spewing, you know, some sort of change to the environment. And that's it. A finished monster and an explanation of just about everything I can think of to make monsters for yourself. Now let's go over how I make encounters and use this guy to make one. Firstly, you need to consider the location. We're going to map this out just like how it happened in the campaign, with a spaceship drifting through space that just had its power cut. You have to think of all the various things you could do to the environment, have them be just as much of an encounter as the monster. I described how it was getting colder, the air was getting thinner, the whole ship was lit with a dim red light, and you could hear creaking and groaning as the ship's pieces expanded and contracted with the pressure and temperatures of deep space. After all of that, consider what effects this should have on the combat. Say, after a certain number of turns, people need to start holding their breath, or they start taking cold damage. They can also make it to the generator and turn the power back on, and give themselves an upper hand. After that, consider the party and what obstacles you can place for certain party members, or what avenues you need to keep open for others. I made sure to have wide open spaces so that the druid could wild shape, and I also made sure to have cover points for the wizard so that they could hide. I made sure to have the monster use its teleport function almost every round, sometimes multiple times, and I made sure to keep talking to people, making sure I knew where they were, what they were thinking, and how I could make this combat fun for them. I kept it in motion with good descriptors. This is a game of time. You can breathe, take a second, ask your players for a moment, and then illustrate and take feedback and make your games more fun for yourself and for your players. And that's the secret to this game. Having fun. I've run 3 full campaigns in my 3 years of playing. Most of that time was spent in Solara, so we're going to use that for the basis of my tutorial today. I've also run at least a dozen one-shots, but before I played regularly, I would run one-shots with my friends going back as far as 2010, using whatever books I could get my hands on. And with those illustrious qualifications out of the way, let's get started. First thing, don't do everything at the start. Just do what matters for your session 1. The rough history of the world, the rough map, and the local areas to where you begin just need a little bit of fleshing out, and you're good. Don't do what I did with my first game and write 300 pages for the entire continent and then later have to rewrite it 4 times as they obviously did things you didn't expect and didn't prepare for. We're going to do this in stages. The first is broad motions. Ideas mostly, fluid brush strokes that just frame the game to be. After that will come rough maps and timelines, placing those ideas into a rough scope to be fleshed out more. After that comes trajectory planning, the stage where once you know the world and more or less what you want to have already happened, you need to start figuring out what you want to happen later to the players. What you want their big problem to be for the game. And then comes tidying and flushing out whatever was left behind from before. And lastly comes building the floor that your players will land on and start running. The inciting incident. So, world building. It begins with a single idea. For the idea that I'll be guiding you through today, I started with this. What would happen if every universe crossed over with every other? If every realm was able to merge together into one giant soup of chaos? And then I ran from there. I had to think of what ideas I wanted to implement, and what state I wanted the world to be in for the campaign to begin. So first, I thought of what ideas I wanted to have as a part of the game. First was portals. Lots of portals. I wanted this to be a proper realms game, and so I made plans for when I eventually had to map out the world to make another map that would overlay on top of it with dozens of portal locations. After portals, I wanted monsters. If this was going to be a weird game, it was going to be properly weird. And if all of these portals were open, something would eventually come through. Something from everywhere. Every plane of reality would be represented, and they would all show their stripes and colors in weird and wacky ways. After that, I had ideas for mutations, and evolutions based on long-term living in other realms, and species growing to adapt to their new homes. Then was when I began to start thinking of history, and of wars between the devils and angels on the material plane, of creatures from the Shadowfell and Feywild possessing and slaughtering mortals, and of dragons and titans roaming the land. Lastly, I thought of deities, and how they would be represented here. And I realized with all of these, I had one great plan forming. So with these rough ideas, I started to pencil them down. I wanted these portals to last. I said from the start, none could be made, and none could be torn down. Spells like Gate only make temporary rifts. No new permanent ones could be made, and when they tried to destroy them, they would release a violent burst of energy so strong it could break a continent apart. A fact that I wanted to be evident, and so I said here that I needed to make a small one or have it be fractured as a lesson they should heed for later. Another thing to note is that on a timeline scale, exploration is key. Make sure to incorporate the discovery of many major sites. Even if you don't know fully what they hold, if one sentence description of them is interesting enough, your players will want to know more, and they will want to investigate. Allow that opportunity to explore with them. So have lost lands, forgotten discoveries, and abandoned, monster-infested civilizations, because things like that draw players to explore the world and the setting that you're making right now. In my last game, the gods played a minor role. No more. This time they would walk the land in mortal bodies, existing among those who worship them. That way, they could be a relevant part of the story, and wow, did that make a major impact on the game and the characters within it. Everyone worshipped someone by the end, and it was through interactions, gifts, and respect, not just devout, blind prayer like in the normal games where only clerics and paladins get abilities. Everyone spoke with deities, and they didn't even all get things from them. It was just a mutual relationship. After portals and gods came war, to which I had there be many, and all of them had a purpose. When making your worlds, think of how each previous battle could hold a lesson. Some decisions can be won by not charging in. Others should be inserted simply to show why areas have been abandoned or why people are distrusting of outsiders. Wars are a great way to have history accelerate and crash. Look to the real world, to the advances conflicts have brought about, and to the destruction they leave in their wake. I had there be a few wars between the devils and men, establishing prior distrust in order to seed doubts that they were being forthright in the present. I had nations, realms in this case, ally with those of Solara against the devils. I also chose for there to be interpersonal conflicts on the material plane between the Massadus Empire, the place where the group was starting in, and the Drumseer Dynasty, the rulers of the other half of the continent. Because not everyone's gonna agree on everything, and it's very important to show that while yes, there is inter-realm conflicts, that does not bring everyone together. After war came planning the portal locations so that I could plan the monsters, and that's when I realized I needed a map. So with maps, it's best to start local. Think about the terrain you want to go for. I wanted a dark and stormy port, and so I looked at the European coastline and its topography and latitude for my reference. It was very hilly and jagged. It's perfect. From there I stretched down, and I started to make it less dark and stormy, and more bright and dry, until you reach a tropical area at the southern point. Then, going back north, and traveling west instead, we went from dark and stormy to cold and marshy, frozen swamps and tundras, and then I just filled inwards. I made lakes and rivers, and a heart where a dividing line for this divided country was a mountain range so tall the winds around it are nearly deafening, the howling peaks. I then roughed out the rest of the world. Basically, I just sort of worked on the same premise. I started with one location and just ebb and flowed terrain ideas and biomes around, making sure that you maintain logic. You go from a gradient of sorts. You start with a little bit of a desert and then you go to a dry savanna. You never go from a desert to a rainforest, because this is not Minecraft, this is real life, where rainforests go to grasslands, go to deserts, that sort of thing. What's most important is that you make it detailed enough to riff on later, but not too detailed as to be hard to remember, describe, or insert a new character or idea into later. Flesh out your starting area, and then have it get more and more vague as you go out. Yes, you can have a world map, but leave yourself some freedom for later. After maps, I then made more maps. I started dotting portals all over the place with this rough overview, and I'm just throwing them all over. Certain places had more, and certain places were more likely to have certain portals. The continent of Prianus, where they started, had a larger variety, but a more spaced out scattering of them. That way they could go anywhere, but it would be a mission to get there. fun exploration for low levels, or easy transport at higher ones. Now let's go even deeper. Our broad strokes are done. We know what terrain we want them to start in, and let's now figure out the specifics of where we want them to begin. A town square, a dungeon, a forest, a tavern, or a school. Anything can be a starting location, but it has to work with the environment and the story that you're planning. In my game, the dark and stormy town of Black Rock Wharf, there was a tavern, and it saw many sea-weary travelers, and was known to be dicey. But only one person slept there, so it didn't matter, and they met later on in the inciting action. For real though, games can start where and however you want. I usually have them come together in a fight, like they're all in one inn or spread out across a town and they hear an explosion and come together, and that's it. In most of these cases, for session 1, all you have to worry about is the first location, the dungeon, the town, the school, and everything else, every single one of them, can be bullet points or general ideas. They start more established the closer you get, and they'll get blurrier and blurrier as you zoom out on your map from the first location. Okay, so now you know where they're starting. It's all fleshed out. The map is fleshed out enough anyways, and the starting location now just needs some love. Since we're not doing dungeons today, that's a future video, let's talk about how to build a town. First, what I like to do is to match the important businesses to the vibe of the town. If you're going for a gloomy port city, have your blacksmith be lit by only the fire of the forge, and stare forlornly at the sea. Have them tell the party a grizzled story of their past, if asked, and be hesitant to relinquish some favored weapon they made long ago. You can also have there be a general store that sees very little trade, and as such makes good deals from the seedy merchant behind the counter. But one thing I usually do is have there be one place that goes dramatically against the atmosphere, to create a better vision through the difference. You can have a bombastic innkeep, or a magic shop where the inside of it is larger than the outside, and it's glowing in neon, and everything is bright and beautiful. After the vibe, though, the rough plans are down, let's get on to what businesses a town should have, and then what it could have. Towns I make usually have at least one inn or tavern, a blacksmith, a general store, and then a temple of some sort. Of course, there could be multiple of these, or none. Those are just guidelines I like to bring in. And then some optional ones I could throw in could be a magic shop, either books, items, potions, or all of the above, a town hall, a sheriff's office, or anything like that, a library, a brewery or 5, a flea market, a fancy alterations or tailor place, a jewelry store, or a hidden underground fighting ring underneath a church. Are also good ideas to bring into your games. Now that we've decided what we want to have in our starting town, let's go over how to write the basics for each of them. Inns or taverns or just hostels can be done very simply. Just 2 sentences. Rooms cost 1 gold per night, and the inn is run by a human named John, for instance. You can, of course, get more complicated, think of more interesting ideas. You can make food and drink menus, have NPCs be planned around the inside, toss on a quest board, or have the quest stumble in from the rain right in their laps. Blacksmiths can have a focus on weapons or armor, or just make everything in the book. It's up to you. They can be written out like, this shop is run by a female dwarf named Broomhilda, and she sells every weapon and armor in the player's handbook in common steel. You can make adjustments by allowing them to craft other materials like adamantine or mithril. You can make them specialize in one kind of equipment, meaning theirs is better, but they can't offer the party something they might be looking for. Other ideas could be that they're missing something that the party wants made, and so they have to do a quest to get it back, and they make the item for free or at a reduced price or something like that. You could have them in possession of something special, like a magic item, that they want to sell for a high price to a worthy customer. General stores after that are incredibly simple. The shop is run by a male named Blinky, and he sells everything in the player's handbook, discounting, no weapons. And that's it. Just like the blacksmith, you can think of one or several magic items you might then have tucked behind the counter. Usually potions of healing, bags of holding, or spell scrolls is usually where I stop with general stores. But you could, of course, change that. Temples can be basic, but I like to make them more complicated and separate to the religions. Think of not only the head priest, but also the other attendants. A temple of Tolona, for instance, may be a place infested with disease, where all the attendants wear plague masks, and they carry disease showing symptoms and yet do not die. Or you can have it be a sick ward or a hospital, or things like that. Magic shops are like general stores, but filled with the weird and wild. They can have flamboyant operators, mysterious objects that the party can buy without fully understanding what they do, only to figure them out later. town halls usually have the head of the city, captain of the guard, and maybe a jail or inn, in or nearby them. They are usually not addressed in games, but think they may come up. Town halls, castles, palaces. If that's the kind of game you're running, you should consider who runs the town, the system of government they use, and the structures they use for their guard. Is it an empire? Is it a democracy? A monarchy? What is it? Libraries can range from the basics, fiction, non-fiction, and the like, to hidden, lost, containing forbidden knowledge, or sealed away, abandoned, or locked down to prevent whatever is still inside from escaping. Breweries are just fun places. Think of drinks that you could make, and then just have them be named and put them where they would be made somewhere in the world. Ales and meads have to come from somewhere. Flea markets can be a fun way to introduce later shopkeepers or NPCs from a town in a rapid fashion, to incite callbacks later on and get relationships going. Tailors, dressmakers, and jewelry shops should be introduced in bigger cities, perhaps before a large ball or gala that the party is going to. And the fighting ring thing, well, it may sound like a joke. I did it, and it was great. Have a charming announcer, a favored grand champion, an interesting arena, and most of all, worthwhile prizes. They'll come back if they like your combats, and they'll stay if they like winning. Now that you have your elements, look at the size of your town. Place them around. 2 inns here on Main Street, a blacksmith in the workers' district, cobblers over there, brewery, general store, and a market in the town square, and a temple on the docks. And there's your city. After the town is done, let's get on to what happens between towns. The gradual ebb and flow of terrain should be complemented in weather, wildlife, and weirdness. Roads and travel should be an opportunity for you to bring in the wild situations that you can think of and wouldn't make sense to focus on in a larger game. You could introduce haunted mansions, monster dens, mountain paths, treacherous terrain, wandering bandits, and grand landscapes. Every space on your map is miles of wide open world, just waiting for you to fill it. Think of the possibilities within every pixel, the worlds in front of you. No more 5-second and then you're there travels. Describe the world in vivid detail. Call for watches at night. Describe the sights, sounds, and smells of the wilds, the stars above, and love every moment as you watch your players' faces light up. And then you too have made it to the next destination. We have maps, timelines, starting locations, and now lastly, our big problem, the campaign settings doom. This does not need to be introduced in Session 1, or even by Session 50. I didn't reveal my hand until roughly Session 30 of Solara, and Matt Mercer, the madman he is, did not reveal the big threat of his second campaign until Session 111. So really, have fun with the random and wild stories, and then drop the bomb that the world is going to end when you feel it's right. Campaign bosses need 3 things. They need a unique history tied to the setting. They need an interesting personality that meshes or bounce off the parties and players well. And they need a goal that is the antithesis of everything the players stand for. Tying a history should be the easiest of those 3, and it can be done before you ever speak with the players about their characters. If you want a world where every realm is connected, have the villain be from the Forgotten Realm, the one that was cut off and left to die, so they fought their way back to life and are going to tear everything down that was built to keep them locked away. The personality that works with the players is more interesting. Once you know about the player's vibe, hostile, mellow, money-hungry, information-hungry, work with that. For a party of hotheads, make a villain who is super casual and gets on their nerves. Make someone who can say, "Oh, you thought this was a fight. Dears, this is just a dance. One that I'm leading." Or if they're desperate for information, make the villain one who seeks to get that information first and use it against them. Or make a villain that's perfectly understandable, but their plan involves doing something horrible, with the ends justifying the means. Killing a planet to save a universe. Lastly, the villain's goal. It must be grand and worthwhile. It must be world-changing. They must want to dominate the continent, end the multiverse, or reveal and topple a government for its lies and spread anarchy throughout the world or the universe. They must be a threat worthy of a party of heroes coming together and stopping. An important thing with quests is that you accurately understand the characters before planning them. For starting your games and planning the first few quests, you don't know them. So what I like to do is run individual session zeros to learn who they are and to be more open when players say no. I knew after finishing my session zeros, this whole Gith Mind Flayer thing in my weekly game, Akarius the Black Between the Stars, was likely not going to happen. I mean, most of the characters are selfish fanatics who only want what's best for themselves. They're not freedom fighters or conquerors. It's not going to really happen. So when I released them from my grip with that whole entire war thing that I framed out, but I didn't really go too in depth with, I didn't really release them from my grip. I've been working the entire time on getting them interested in a quest that I've been planning as a backup as well since before the start. One that ends with all of them getting fame, power, and wealth, because why not? And they get to be angry and selfish and brutal the whole way they do it. It's important that when planning your quests, a good hook is how you start. It's got to be really enticing. If you understand your players' characters, you will know generally what's appealing to them. Usually it's power, knowledge, wealth, love, fulfillment, or something like that. If nothing connects them all though, no single thread that you can spin to draw them all in, there is a good way to unite them all early on. It's to piss them off. Kill someone they love. Steal from them. Taunt them. Make them feel like everything is their fault. If they walk into a place of their own choice, have them walking through that door summon the end of the world. And also, something important, is that after doing it 2 campaigns in a row, give your villains a damn face, have them look your players in the eyes, and make them see red. When choosing your plot hook, have your villains break into their room in the night, take their bag with some important MacGuffin in it, and run. Or have them kill someone and blame the party. Or worst of all, have them charm the little kobold the party adopted as their child, and have that kobold do something horrible, so that the party has to prove their innocence and capture the villain to face justice. Then sit back and rely on the party to find the motivation to do your quest. If they bite, you know you did good. If they don't, consider reworking as much of that quest into another story as you can, and change the hook to something else. It's up to you to find what motivates your players. I can only give suggestions from my own experiences. Now that your players are interested, let's get on to my processes for writing a quest. This also kind of functions as a how-to homebrew one-shots, I guess, but let's keep going. So, when planning a quest, determine how many phases you want it to have. Phases, as I call them, can be roughly defined as travel, investigation, and combat. Travel is pretty self-explanatory. It's the time getting to the quest. There can be random encounters, travel complications, and inter-party conversations. The last one, you may really have to encourage more than allow them to say. Say something like, hey, you're on the road for a week. Are there any questions any of you want to ask the others? Or any games that you want to play? Or any stories that you want to tell to everyone else to let them know who you are a little bit more? Good complications for the road can be weather. Think of how temperature and storms can affect travel depending on the environment. Another could be migrating wildlife. Think of how a herd of buffalo or something could stop a party dead for a day, or not be a problem at all because they have a druid or ranger. And lastly, for travel, random encounters on the way to the quest. These can be anything. A horde of orcs, a school of weresharks, a gobbo of gobbos. If you're struggling to come up with ideas for encounters, look to the published one in Xanathars for ideas to build on, or look online. There's so many random encounter tables published out there for you to borrow from, but just make sure that they make sense for the game that you're running and the environment that they're passing through. Consider the ecology and ethology for the area, how it would have impacted a species over time, and what impact that species would have on their environment. If you're running a one-shot, only have there be one little travel phase at the start. I've been in one-shots that don't end up being one-shots, because you have to turn them into 2 or 3 shots, because you spent 2.5 hours holding your boat together against a storm that kept spitting up monsters and other BS at you. If you're running a regular campaign, though, just do what feels right. If you're just ready to get on with it, then say they're just there. I'm sure they're just as excited as you are to get on with the quest that you wrote for them. I know they should be. For the investigation phase, this is the main section of the quest, where they're uncovering mysteries and connecting pieces of the puzzle. Since this is not How to Homebrew Dungeons, our example quest is going to be a mystery. At a generic, non-copyright infringing tavern, our party watches as outside the window an explosion rocks the street outside. They run out to try and see more, finding a necklace with a strange symbol near the blast center, tied around a strange stone. The guards start rounding up everyone nearby, including trying to apprehend the party. They run from this, though. The party encounters a few random encounters in the streets, and then they come across a door with the same symbol on it. Now is where they begin the investigation phase. Inside of this is a maze they uncover to plot to topple a city's government, and they figure out their next target, a ball where several important figures will be. Going to investigate this further, they are ambushed by a group of figures all wearing the same symbol as the necklace. They take the stone and run away. Later on, the party discovers that the stone was the key to an ancient vault that houses 500,000 gold pieces. They track them to this vault, where they are ambushed yet again, but they fight back, pinning the baddies in the vault, not allowing them to leave. It seems like a stalemate. What will happen next? It's on you to decide. The investigation phase of a quest could literally be anything. It is truly up to you with how to determine its length, content, and mood. One shot should be mostly investigation, with the party learning and solving puzzles until they go and reach the end combat. Investigation phases can be discussions with NPCs, they can be mazes, they can be mysteries. When homebrewing, when writing a quest, you can literally start anywhere and take it anywhere. The investigation phase is what ties it all together. And now, with that long talk of me basically saying, figure it out, done, it's combat time. I've already gone over how to homebrew monsters and combats. Click up there if you missed it. But in short, for a quest, 3 combats max, unless it's the big one at the end of the game. Starting conflicts are a maybe. Usually there's a conflict in the middle, and there's always a conflict at the end. For one-shots, never have more than 2 combats. They take like 2 hours to run each, and you don't want to waste time when you could be running something far more interesting. Combats should be necessary, and they should drive the story. They are fights with the antagonist, their goons, or the world trying to stop you through no knowledge of their own. See the guards from above who have no clue what's going on, but want to, and they start rounding people up for questioning. When planning a dungeon or a dungeon-like area, you must first consider where it's going to be placed, as that's going to guide a lot of your decisions later on. You could need a dungeon in a densely packed forest, in which case it could be a dryad's intricately designed nest, or a long-lost temple. It could be underwater, in which case it could be a Sahagan palace, or a long-lost temple. It could be inside of a volcano, in which case it could be a series of tunnels created by burrowing magma creatures, or it could even be a long-lost temple. All of these are valid, and I'm just picking randomly from those. I think I'm going to make a long-lost temple, and I think I'm going to set it in an underwater seaweed forest growing over a dormant volcano on the seafloor. Jokes aside, though, say that you do want to make that. The atmosphere writes itself. It should be cold at first, but grow warmer as they venture inwards and downwards. It might not conjure a lot of smells, but eventually sulfur could perhaps creep into and overpower their nostrils as they grow closer and closer to the center of this ashen place. Sounds will be muffled, hard to recognize, but essential to follow, as their visions are obscured by the murky depths and plumes of smoke and steam, giving them actually like the mechanical effect of being heavily obscured. Also, perhaps eventually, they could come to a chamber filled with air. Just a random idea, but random ideas like that they make for iconic ideas later on. Iconic moments for your players to reminisce about later. When they're fleshed out and described with the same love and attention that you hold for them, I'm sure that your players will share that love. Okay, so now we have our idea. It's time to plan how it's going to be done within. First, how long do you want this dungeon to be? Is it a small one lasting only 1 or 2 games? A larger one that bookends a big quest, a grand game that takes 5 or 6 entire sessions to run through? Or should the dungeon be the game itself, like Mad Mage, and take 20 to 40 sessions to fully run through? This will determine how your dungeon is formatted. A shorter one will have a lot more focus on puzzles, traps, and mazes, while a longer one can incorporate more combats and harder challenges for your players. So, the 3 layouts I'm showing you right now are common examples of dungeons, but this middle one is what we're going to use for our dungeon today. A nice middle ground between incredibly simple and insanely detailed and intricate. This one will last for about 3 games. For a lower level group, it will have 4 combats, 4 puzzles, and somewhere around 7 traps. That's sort of the numbers you should be skating around. Obviously, you can have more or less of the different ones, but if you want a dungeon to only last a certain number of games, combats are usually where you want to limit yourself. For instance, your average combat's going to probably take about an hour. If it's just like 5 people against a mimic, it's going to take 30 minutes or less. But if it's, 6 skeletons against a party of 5, it's going to take, about an hour. And, your final combat's going to last about 2 at least. So that's sort of how you have to be thinking about these things. If you want your game to only last, 3 hours each session, you really got to start considering how long your combats are. So, the first combat or 2 should be more of a nuisance, or a way to tire or weaken the characters before the final challenge. Stuff like mimics, doppelgangers, and skeletons. Things act as interesting fodder. For an underwater dungeon like this, I'm going to modify the skeleton stat block to bring in some things from the Sahagin, and have them populate a room that they have to go through, and then maybe also a side room over here that's locked, and they can go in there if they want to get some extra loot as a reward for exploring. But it's important that you make it clear that the main goal of the dungeon is down one path, and that this is a side path, unless you want your dungeon to act as a maze. If you don't, if you want it to be a very clear, straightforward, we're going through here, this should be the obvious way, you should look and see, that's probably a side corridor that takes you to some bedrooms, probably will have some loot, but won't be exactly where you're looking, then make it clear to them that that's what you're actually going for. I could also incorporate sentient statues or golems to populate other portions, being an underwater dungeon. Statues covered in moss and seaweed are good environmental things as well. So like here, maybe I could put one stone golem that guards some passageway perhaps. And then in the final chamber for our last combat, we could perhaps put our big boss, and it could be something like an aboleth. A strong foe for sure, but one that could be outsmarted instead of purely beaten in combat, if that's the kind of story you want to tell. So, next with puzzles. They should be along the lines of riddles, simple interlocking pattern matching, or fake buttons that cause a series of lights and sounds to flash and reset whenever the button presses, but never actually mean any harm. Psychological instead of purely physical. I'm going to start the dungeon with actually one of those right here, and then have a ring puzzle there where they could match a pattern on the wall, and then maybe we could also have a riddle here, and then over here right before the final chamber maybe you can do a magic puzzle where you have to cast 3 different spells of different schools to gain entry to the room. Cantrips are allowed because what if they already used all their spell slots? They have to get in somehow. And then lastly, for traps, they should be along the lines of pit traps, arrow slits, tripwires, and the sort, thrown around like so. So what's very important is that you check yourself and make sure that it never gets boring. Like here, it's combat, trap, puzzle, combat. That's a good order. 3 puzzles, combats, or trap in a row is never fun. You never like, okay, roll initiative, and roll initiative again, and there's the whole game. It was just stupid, pointless combats, and we didn't even make it to the end. Or all we did was solve your dumb riddles for 3 hours, and then we left. That's not fun. So, over here, we also have a trap, puzzle, combat, trap, loot. But that's fine, because it's optional, and you made sure they knew it was optional. The general scheme shouldn't have too many double ups. If you want a longer dungeon, extend these orders out, add social encounters like trapped friendlies or buried cities. You can think of adding wandering outsiders or knowledgeable remnants from older expeditions like ghosts that haunt the place or journals of adventurers past. The main threat at the end can be guarding anything from a lost treasure like a magical item or a royal heirloom to just a chest full of gold and jewels. The monsters and enemies within can be there because they're vengeful spirits of failed adventurers past, or because they were paid for or enslaved by the boss at the end. All of these ideas should be incorporated with ideas that we've gone over before. Homebrewing monsters should get you a good idea for sort of the cannon fodder that you could throw in their way. The campaign settings could help you think of big bads and ideas like that. Sort of ideas like this. Quests, obviously, how to homebrew quests will help you with the ideas behind why they've gone into the dungeon and what story the dungeon could unfold. These are sort of the general schemes. There's also other things to consider in dungeons, such as lighting, temperature, sounds, things that I mentioned earlier, but things that actually will make a dungeon feel unique. Say only half your group has dark vision. You've been giving them the benefit of the doubt so far, but now they're underwater, they have no torches, it's dark, what is happening? Thank you all for joining me with this special look back at the first series to begin and end on our channel. If you want to see more videos like this, feel free to subscribe down below and check out our channel where we will be posting content regularly every week. We also have a Twitch page where we stream our weekly game, Icarius the Black Between the Stars, as well as a Twitter and an Instagram that you should go follow because we post player-exclusive information on those. But that wraps it up for today's video. Thank you all for joining me, and have a good day, everyone. Bye.